So I want to thank everybody for joining us tonight for our virtual program. I'm really excited to be able to introduce our presenter tonight, Rob Bier. Rob was born in Janesville and graduated from Parker High School. He's retired from the Air Force and currently works for the Department of Homeland Security and lives in Maryland. So he's coming to us live from far off location. So we thank him for doing that. He started the Janesville Brewery Research Project in 2014. And as part of that, comes back to Janesville once a year for 3 to 4 weeks to continue the research, which includes preserving parts of the North Side Brewery behind Mercy Hospital, and also interviewing brewers, brewery workers, and others with knowledge of Janesville's 18 breweries. Tonight's presentation actually focuses on another effort that started in May of 2019 when researchers uncovered 2 brewery cellars at the Southside Brewery location just behind the Ice Arena and the National Guard building. The Southside Brewery started in 1861. It ultimately closed in 1918 due to growing fears of prohibition. Then the brewery buildings were razed in the early 1950s, and along with that, the cellars were sealed until they were uncovered by Rob and his team. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Rob to get us started with tonight's presentation.
Thank you for the introduction there, Phil. It's a pleasure to be back with the Hedberg Library. I think, I don't know if most people know, but the first presentation I gave on Janesville's brewing history was in 2016 with the Hedberg at the library, so it's great to be back. I'd also like to thank everyone who's in attendance tonight. I mean, I really appreciate your interest in the not only the beer aspect of it, but also the history of Janesville, as well as the pre-prohibition status that Janesville played before Prohibition effectively killed off their brewing business. Now, I've watched several of these presentations, these online presentations, and the thing I quickly noticed is that after watching somebody talk for about 5 minutes, you get tired of watching them. So what I've done for this presentation is try to front load it with a lot of graphics to include photos, maps, and even some video integrated in here. So what I'm going to do here in a second is switch over to that. So you'll be looking primarily at the images, and you'll just hear me talking over them. I've also worked in, as I try to switch over here, a series of trivia questions that I hope will help keep people, especially those who grew up in Janesville, have some Janesville beer knowledge. So as soon as I get a firm, they can see the slide from Phil, I'll launch right into it. We good, Phil?
Yep, we're good. But before you launch into it, Rob, I forgot to mention something. Just so everybody's aware, we are recording tonight's program so that we can make this available to anybody who was not able to make it tonight. It shouldn't be an issue. We've got everybody's video off, but I did want to make everybody aware of that. So, Rob, with that, you're all set.
All right. The presentation, I think I'm timed in about 40 minutes, trying to keep it clear and concise. Really 4 parts to it. I'm going to talk very briefly about this thing called the Janesville Brewery Research Project. Do a little bit of more detailed history of the Southside Brewery, so there's context to what it is we were doing, and then kind of tell the story, kind of put you in our situation, see the effort from our eyes really, as to how this effort came about and the astounding discovery that we made, and then a little piece about the future, which we hope holds good things in store for the Janesville's brewery, the remnants of Janesville's breweries. A lot of this Phil already covered. The bottom line is after graduating high school, I joined the Air Force and I retired in the one place that I said I'd never live, and that's near Washington, D.C. For context purposes, I'm maybe 10 minutes away from the Samuel Mudd House of Abraham Lincoln fame in Southern Maryland. Every year I take a 3 to 4 period of leave to go up to Janesville to do nothing but do research work at the Northside Brewery or conduct interviews, primary and secondary interviews with any descendants of the breweries, because one of the most fascinating aspects of this entire endeavor is when you meet with some of the descendants of the Croaks, the Knips, and even the Buobs, is they know very little about their own history, family history. So a lot of this, all this information I share with them as much as possible to try to help them get a better appreciation for the role their families played. So how did this thing called the Janesville Brewery Research Project come to be? I get asked this a lot. It all started when I went over to the Rock County Historical Society, and they happened to have a display up of some bottles from the Croak Brewery. And I was like, those look pretty neat. In the 1970s, I was big into collecting beer cans. So to me, it's just kind of a natural progression. Okay, start collecting bottles. So I walked over from the Historical Society, which is near Mercy Hospital, to the site of the old Croak Brewery, and started looking around. And this picture here is taken, there's already some clearing going on at the brewery site, but it was completely covered with trees, brush, buckthorn. You could barely see 3 feet into it, but there were some signs that, hey, there was a brewery here at one time. And then I looked on the ground and saw literally thousands of pieces of broken glass from beer bottles. And now my interest is really piqued. So I immediately went to the Hedberg Library, and they have an awesome reference section there with some great maps. And I started looking up breweries. And I found one this was from 1917, and it shows the North Side Brewery, which if you look right across from it at about the 1 o'clock position on that picture, you can see there used to be a small lagoon right across from it. And then I also found one on the south side, which really captured my attention because the area today down there looks nothing like it did back in 1917. I started doing some research on the Growing Up in Janesville page and saw that people had mentioned these different breweries, but no one was really taking it on as a research project. And that's one thing I've always wanted to do is do research. So I kind of fell into it. So the question is, well, if I'm going to try to document all of Janesville's 18 historic breweries, I have to have a project name. And first choice was Rob's research project, and that doesn't carry much weight. So I went ahead and renamed it the Janesville Brewery Research Project. And I think in 2015, I actually started a Facebook presence with the Janesville breweries. And pretty much once a month, I make a post on some aspect of Janesville's 18 different breweries. So here's a map that kind of shows where all the breweries were located. The 2 main ones is the one up north. It has a 2 with the number 2 around it. That's because the brewery burned and there were actually 2. It was rebuilt, so there's 2 of them. And there's the one in the south by Lions Park with the 3, and that's actually the Southside Brewery. So I'm going to jump right into the first trivia question here to test the knowledge of the citizens of Janesville. It has to do with both beer and Janesville. So the question is, in addition to brewing beer, the Southside Brewery, under the ownership of John Rothinger, also housed the city's first police station, library, jail, waterworks, or slaughterhouse. And I will give you a clue for this first one. If you think about what the presentation is about and who's hosting it, you should be able to figure out it was in fact a library. When you're doing research, culling through old newspapers, you come across a lot of interesting articles. And this one here from February 1901 gave an overview of how the young men of Janesville actually opened up a small reading room, a library room, in the second story of what was then called the Buob Brewery, but was previously John Rothinger. So if you want to trace the history of the Janesville City Library, it leads right to Janesville's breweries, more specifically the Southside. So trying to give everyone a context of what the lay of the land was, both previously in 1915 timeframe and today. If you look between the Ice Arena and the Wisconsin National Guard building, you'll see a yellow overlay, and that is the footprint of the brewery. There's also a small storage shed just slightly south of it. The original bottling works is in the driveway of where the Globe Sheet Metal shop is today, and the pond, it was called Buob's Pond, that was located just a bit further south. Now, this is an interesting story, and I have to thank a gentleman who reached out to me on his own, Kevin Knitt, because he was researching a gentleman by the name of John Singer, who had a brewery in the same area. And I was under the impression that he was the owner of the first Southside Brewery. When you look at how the area was laid out, though, back in 1915, you had South Main Street ran all the way straight through. Where the parking lot of the Ice Arena stands today, you had 4 lots, and John Singer owned those 4 lots. And he, as it turned out, after spending a day at the Rock County Courthouse going over property records, we were able to identify that the brewery John Singer opened up was in that parking lot area in those different lots. And eventually, his business was not doing well. So John Rothinger came in, bought all his equipment, and built a Southside Brewery around 1861. And one of the things you'll hear me say consistently throughout every presentation I give is that once you start pulling the thread on these types of events, you never know who you're going to meet. And the fact that Kevin was kind enough to come down and spend the day and really show me how to go ahead and do the research at the Rock County Courthouse was fantastic, and it's very much appreciated. So if you want to get a somewhat slightly larger historical context of how the brewery looked, here's a drawing. I think it's a very popular one. It's entitled Janesville Looking Down the River. It's 1877. And you see the Southside Brewery there, I've highlighted in yellow. Probably didn't look quite like that, but it's close enough. You can see how South Main runs all the way. And then you have Beloit Avenue spinning off. Of course, they do have the terrain on the left where they have the gravel pit accurate, but then as you go further south, it's not completely accurate. So sometimes these things are spot on, other times they're not. 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago, Bruce Monson, who was actually doing a lot of research on Janesville's breweries in the 1970s, he was kind enough to share with me a lot of the information he had accumulated. And he brought over this map that I had heard of but had never seen. And in the corner of this map from 1861 was a sketch of Janesville Steam Brewery, also known as the Southside. And this is the one that John Rothinger had built. I believe the Hedberg Library now has a copy of this 1861, the larger map, and I would encourage everyone to check it out because it really is fascinating. I also approached about 2017 timeframe an artist, and this is before I had this image here, and I asked him, his name was Robert Witzak. I'm like, do you think it'd be possible for you to paint a building you've never seen based on information I provide to say how a brewery should have looked? And he had agreed to do so. But when this picture came along, Robert immediately changed gears and went ahead and painted this color image of what the Janesville Steam Brewery looks like today. And that's really truly a fantastic job he did. After John Rothinger, he passed in the 1870s, late 1870s. The brewery hung on for a little while longer. It burned down several times, actually. Two gentlemen who previously were working at the Northside Brewery behind Mercy Hospital, John and Michael Buob, took over the remains of the brewery. It had been burned down in 1884 and rebuilt it. And here's a photo of them. They're on obviously a horse and wagon loaded with beer. That's located along South Jackson Street, roughly where the YMCA is located on the western end of their parking lot. That church was raised in around 1972 or 1974. But and again, this is the reason I was able to get this photo was another friend, a gentleman I met named John Steiner up in Milwaukee, was kind enough to open up everything he had collected on Janesville and share it with me. So now we have two of the more common photos we see. This is the Southside circa 1910-ish, when it's just a Michael Buob brewery, Southside Brewery. John retired around the late 1890s, and Michael took it over, and his son was slated to take it over, William, but he had a series of health issues, and when he passed away around 1912, the brewery ended up going up for sale not too much longer, and it was sold to a group of businessmen brewers, I should say, out of Germany, Peter Meer, and he renamed it the Badger State Brewing Company, which I believe there's one up in Green Bay now. But and just between those two pictures, this picture and the previous picture, you can see how much things change. In this photo here, you have the road to South or Beloit Avenue running right next to the brewery, whereas in the previous one it didn't. So there's always a lot of things you're looking out for from the historian point of view to try to identify where this building actually was. So a little note on beer cellars before we even began this. I ran across the theme of beer cellars and collapses and individuals dying, and this is exactly what happened in 1893 when Michael Buob was owning the company. Some men were doing some work in a beer cellar, and the cellar was essentially, the way these cellars were built was they essentially dug out a big hole about 20 feet by 40 feet, and they would build a cellar with rocks or bricks, limestone or bricks, and then they would cover it back up. And they needed constant attention to make sure they wouldn't collapse. Well, as they were reinforcing one of the cellar walls, one of the men heard a noise that the wall was getting ready to collapse. He yelled out. 3 of the 4 men moved quick enough, but unfortunately James Donovan didn't. And it was quite sad. This is not the actual tunnel or cellar where that happened. It just kind of illustrates when something with all the earth, the brick, the stone, the mortar all comes collapsing down. It's literally tons of weight that just collapses, and it can quickly consume people. Of course, he didn't have unions back then, and he didn't have safety standards. So at the end of the day, a lot of people took up different collections for his wife, and they raised a substantial bit of money for her, but she ended up moving out of Janesville shortly after this. Here's an image from 1937 taken from an airplane, and it shows the layout, again, pretty much the same as the overlay. You start with the brewery, where the brewery is identified in yellow there is where the ice arena would be today. The bottling house, which is right across on South Beloit, that's the last remaining building that's still standing today. It's associated with Janesville's beer brewing history. And of course, the park. There was another photo taken after the brewery closed around 1918, because Prohibition pretty much spelled the end of it. The brewery went through changed hands a number of different times. And eventually the upstairs portion of it became a set of apartments, and it became so overgrown, and the brewery became dilapidated. The pond became so overgrown that the city had to step in and do something. So they ended up tearing down the brewery, and the star shows the angle, of where this 1952 photo was taken from. And really your best reference point is the Globe sheet metal building with a nice triangular front on it. And they repurposed a lot of this wood to build the Janesville parking meter building, which was located roughly where the City Hall currently sits today. So here's one final picture that tries to tie everything together as far as what it is we're looking at. And from the historian perspective, it kind of gives us an idea of really, if you're gonna start looking for things, where it is you would look for them. I'm afraid some of the best stuff is probably buried underneath the parking lot of the Wisconsin National Guard building. And again, the area has changed so much, it resembles very little of today what it looked like back in the early 1900s when the brewery was in operation. So how did this effort to start looking for beer cellars begin? Because I have to be kind of upfront, is I had known there were cellars there, but never in a million years did I think that any would still be there, be active. Sorry, I get a little bit ahead of myself here. Now, if you paid attention, I know I'm moving somewhat quick on these slides, but the answer was on that previous slide. Buob's Pond, the big body of water there, was the first park in Janesville to have lifeguards, water fountains, diving board, lights, or a water slide. And I don't know if many of you collect any Janesville postcards, but if you do, you will see one, and it doesn't say it explicitly that it's at the brewery, but that is Buob's Pond. And in the background, you see the gravel from the pit that is now Kiwanis Pond. And it was the first park equipped with lights. It was a standard practice for brewers to have areas where people could come in and dance and enjoy their beer in a relatively safe environment. There was another one further up just across from Riverside Park. They called that Buob's Grove. That's when they were working at the north side. So places like this were very common throughout Janesville for people to go celebrate. So this all started when I received a phone call from Colonel Mike Williams, and he's pictured there on the left. And he was kind of he was the leader, really the leader of the effort, because him and Tom Presney, the gentleman next over on your right, they were both former city employees. And in the 1990s, they had both entered a beer cellar at the former location of the Southside Brewery. Brent DeReamer, I met Brent through Facebook. He is perhaps Janesville's most renowned bottle collector, from getting bottles out of the Rock River. And he had actually found a fragment of a bottle, and it had Rothinger on it. And he was trying to find out who John Rothinger was. So as soon as he contacted me, I'm like, hey, you've got a pretty old bottle fragment there. It may not be worth something from a collector perspective, from a historical perspective, it's fantastic. So he quickly became part of the team. And of course, there's yours truly with the goofy headlamp on. So Mike Williams calls me up in around 2017, I believe it was. And he was very short and to the point. He's like, look, my name is Mike Williams. I have some information that I think you may be of value to you. And he started to explain how in mid 1990s, him and Tom Presney had went into these cellars, and he was like, look, I firmly believe there's more there to be found. They went into these cellars when the sinkholes opened up. They went ahead and they filled them with large chunks of gravel and limestone, but he was insistent that there was more there. So I began asking around, and the gentleman who owns Globe Sheet Metal, Richard, I had a conversation with him, and he explained to me that in 2012, a big sinkhole opened up in that area where the 2012 was annotated, and there were 3 dump trucks worth of gravel were dumped in it to fill it. And then when I stopped by the Janesville operations building, they mentioned the name of a gentleman named Phil Suter, who had actually gone ahead and went into those cellars before they were filled up. So he gave me a great interview and kind of helped me point in the direction of, yeah, there's a lot of openings down there. This is not just a 1 or 2 cellar type thing. So taking all that information together with what Colonel Mike had said, and I did an inventory of the area, just a survey to kind of see what was there. And it's one of these things where you kind of got to know what you're looking for. A lot of it, and I'll admit up front, wasn't terribly obvious to me. It took some time to see some of the things that were there. But here's a shot, and you can kind of see how the sloping of the terrain goes from really east to west. And you notice these little patches where the grass is growing kind of funny, and those are the beginning of sinkholes forming. And the more you looked around, the more we began to see disturbances like that. There was a very weird slant to this little hill right there that just kind of seemed out of place. Further north, you could see in these long pieces how the grass is longer and it's growing quite different. Again, those are all telltale signs. And then you get some more of the obvious ones where you actually see a piece of limestone sticking out. And in the last case, there were actually some bricks that were there. So we knew clearly there were signs of the brewery there. And with the beginning of the sinkholes, maybe there were some cellars that were still there that could be accessible. So this is where Brent, and he was, I'm going to play some video here in a second. He was kind enough to go up there and take a survey and kind of mark out, because we had these sinkholes. After my visit in February of last year, these sinkholes really began to open up quite widely. And we notified the city, and they went ahead and secured them, because the biggest fear is that honestly somebody could fall in there and you would never hear them. So Brent had went out and shot this video here. And what you see right away is you've got about maybe 2 feet, 18 inches of solid dirt that's kind of just on the top. And that hole goes down actually about 7 feet. He actually measured it out for me, both the width and the depth. Now, we didn't see any signs whatsoever of any bricks or limestone, anything like that, because when it collapsed, everything clearly just came down on top. I was hoping to have some bricks on the side. You could see some, but there was absolutely nothing there. And I firmly believe that the only thing really holding a lot of that up were those tree roots from those 3 trees that surprisingly were planted by Tom Presney and Colonel Mike Williams back when they were in the city operations department in the mid-1990s. So we agreed to go ahead and make a run of this, but we're obviously talking about city property. And as much as we'd like to go ahead and just start digging anywhere on city property, you can't do that. So what we did is we put together a very comprehensive, we call it a concept of operations. And we kind of outlined why it is we want to do this and how we're going to do this, keeping safety in mind. Because if you look at it really from the city's perspective, there's really not much of an incentive for them to do this, other than the fact that they recognize what we're trying to do is preserve this, document and preserve it, and then take the necessary safety protocols. So we put together this. I'm not going to go through the whole slide. We just kind of outlined where everything was. We intended to have a ground penetrating radar scan of the area, because I know there's far more cellars there. We're hoping to find the extent of it. That just didn't play out due to timing. And for the cellars themselves, one thing we're very interested in is actually getting a look of how they were constructed. What did they use, and really what kind of condition would they be in if we're able to get there? Now, the sinkholes were already starting. I kind of want to reinforce this point. So they were going to open up one way or the other. So we're very appreciative when the city came back and said, go ahead and do it. We had the safety protocols were by most extents, probably most regards, extreme, because if anything goes wrong, there's, of course, liability issues. And we wanted to reassure that we were doing this of our own volition. And if anything had happened, that we are responsible ourselves. And we went to great lengths to try to make that point clear. And fortunately, very fortunately, they went ahead and they signed off on it. So we had our timing sequence. Our first go date was going to be the 10th of May. I think it was Mother's Day weekend. And we laid out everything we're going to do step by step. And we have the excavation sequence for how we're going to go ahead and keep people at a distance in case people started showing up. I know a lot of people noticed there was a lot of activity there, but fortunately we didn't get any. I think we had two passerbys that actually stopped. And then I can't emphasize the role that safety played in this whole endeavor. And that was always first on my mind. As exciting as finding a cellar is, the one thing I didn't want to risk is anyone getting hurt at all. And then the post excavation sequence, and then finally the agreement that anything that we uncover is going to be documented. It's not going to be sold on eBay. Again, going into this, you had no idea what to expect. Personally, I was thinking we'd be lucky to find a couple bricks, a few pieces of limestone, and call it a day. But we just wanted to make sure that was all transparent. That's not like we're just going in there to take stuff and leave and sell it and have it disappear in people's private collections. The city was kind enough to mark out where the hazards were. So we had the one in the orange one is a fiber optic cable, and the other one is a electrical line. I, of course, am terrified that we're going to hit one, if not both. We agreed to do the excavation by hand for a number of reasons. One is you don't want a multi-thousand-pound piece of equipment excavating and not sure what it's sitting on top of, and suddenly it drops 10 feet, and then I just paid for an excavator. So we went with it by hand. And my inclination was to go to the primary piece up top where the sinkhole had opened up considerably. I'm very thankful I deferred to Colonel Mike, and we went to the secondary place first. Here's a great photo of what the brewery looked like. And again, you don't know it's a brewery because the postcard isn't annotated as such, but it shows again how all this terrain has been changing over the years. So that was all our prep work, and just to get us to be able to go ahead and excavate. And we brought a ton of equipment with us for all different types of contingencies, because again, you don't know what to expect. I'll be honest, I left a fair amount of the equipment behind in Janesville at my father's house, because I was convinced we weren't going to find again anything but a few bricks and call it a day. And I just didn't feel like loading up the trailer and bringing it in the morning. It's like, we'll just see how it goes. But before we get into what it is, how this all actually unfolded, I'm going to hit you with another trivia question. And this one, I don't think there's much truth to it. One of these old legends. But John Buob, who was the owner of the Southside with his brother Michael, is allegedly responsible for which of the following, incidents: releasing carp into the mighty Rock River, accidentally starting a fire at the Myers Opera House, organizing a fundraiser to rebuild the Milwaukee Street Bridge, founding the Riverside Park opposite of Buob's Grove, or installing gas lights along South Main and Beloit Avenue. Now, anyone who's ever gone to the Rock River knows there is more an abundance of carp than anything else. And in a 1950s article from the Janesville Gazette, there was a legend has it that John had kept carp in his pond, and that it was flooded out during a series of rainstorms, and the carp escaped from his pond into the Rock River. I personally don't subscribe to that. I think it's more of, again, an old story. But anyway, he's got the distinction of having that, of being the guy responsible for releasing carp pinned to him. So the day of our excavation begins, and Colonel Mike, myself, and Tom, we met at the Citrus Cafe for kind of a pre-game meal, so to speak. And I was quite nervous. I somehow managed to scarf down three pancakes, and we're like, "All right, guys, let's go do this." And right away, Colonel Mike picked out a point, and we made our first hole, and we immediately ran along a foundation. And of course, you can see the number of bricks on the right side of the photo next to the shovel. And again, we're all down in area D there on the map to your left. And at this point, I'm pretty much just following his lead because, again, him and Tom Presney were the two gentlemen that have experience there. I'm just the guy trying to make sense of it all. So he said, look, Rob, if this is a foundation based on the slant, the grade of the hill, we're clearly on the outside of the brewery. Let's move up. And then just in the upper part of the picture there, you can see him actually moving out one of the boards that the city had installed to cover one of the sinkholes that had opened up. So there were two sets of sinkholes. The picture in the middle is Colonel Mike actually digging out those ones on the right. And I had started in on the one on the left. And no more than 3 or 4 shovel scoops in, I noticed all the dirt was rolling backwards somewheres, but I couldn't see. So I took out my headlamp, couldn't make sense of it. So I went ahead and I stuck a shovel down there, shovel handle, and the whole thing went in there and then some. And I'm kind of like, all right, I think we're onto something here. So now you start getting a little nervous. So then I realized my folly in not bringing all of my digging equipment with me. So I said, look, guys, I'm going to run back, grab some stuff out of the trailer, be right back. I think the biggest thing we needed were tarps to put the dirt on top so we could fill the hole a lot quicker when that time came. By the time I got back, this is what we found. They had Mike and Colonel Mike and Brent had dug this entranceway. And at this point, I'm just flabbergasted. When you think of the odds of cellars that were built back in the 1860s, being able to find them and then find a point where you can actually access them, that truly is a 1 in a million shot. So at this point, I'm kind of in disbelief of the whole thing. And Colonel Mike looks to me and says, hey, Rob, why don't you strap up and go on in there and take a look? And I'm like, I think I'm going to pass. And this is where Brent raised his hand. He said, shoot, I'll go in. So part of our safety protocol was you're going to go in with a harness. So if anything happens, we can at least find the body if something horribly goes wrong. Brent showed no inhibition whatsoever. I know he's a certified diver, so he's used to, going into situations like that. I am not. So what we did is we hooked up a GoPro and I watched above on my camera while he went in with I watched on my phone while he went in with the camera. And I'll never forget the initial conversations back and forth as Glenn is sliding in there. Brent is. Really, my heart is in my throat because I'm just terrified of something going wrong. And suddenly you hear him say, geez, it's pretty big in here. He's like, oh, I can stand up. And then he starts moving around. He goes, oh, this is huge, Rob. He goes, oh my God, there's another archway. There's another cellar down here. And I'm just, again, in complete disbelief. So I went ahead and went in, and this is a first picture of what I saw when I went in with a headlamp there. And you notice immediately a couple things. One, the ceiling is intact. It looks exceptional. But you do also notice a bunch of crushed limestone in the back. And that's a more complete picture of what it looked like. That limestone, in all likelihood, was dumped there by Colonel Mike and Tom Presney in the mid-1990s. It came crashing through the wall, but the entire structure itself was still quite stable. And I think if you look at the ceiling, you'll notice that even the mortar and I'm not sure that's white paint that's there. It's all in excellent shape. Immediately you start noticing things that are affixed to the cellar ceiling. I'm sure some of these things were used for ropes or pulleys or different ways to move the kegs of beer. I don't know specifically what they did. I think there's a green wire you can see there hanging in the middle. That was, I think, something that was put on many years later. Because as we come to find out, this place was a hangout quite a bit for kids in the 70s. Now, this is what the dirt pile we slid down in looks like. And just behind that pile to your right is the archway to the second cellar. So again, at this point, I can't stress just how amazing the whole discovery was. Brent and Tom Presney spent about a half hour digging out. And the dirt here is just a very thick clay. It's had so much moisture that it's almost like trying to move like wet, heavy concrete. It's just is a challenge. And they got extremely dirty doing that, but they were able to make their way through to the other cellar. And as soon as we went in that other cellar, this is what I found, a Big Mac container. And you say, well, what's the significance of a Big Mac container? Well, it kind of helps us to date the last time people were in there. And McDonald's came out with their Big Mac around 1968, 69. So that tells me that 1969 is probably the earliest these group of people were in this cellar. And as we'll see in some of the other photographs here, this clearly was a little bit of a party area. For you younger kids who may not be familiar with all those cans in the middle of the picture there, that's how you would purchase kerosene back in the 60s and 70s. It was in little tin containers. And I have no doubt that they would bring the kerosene in there to light their lamps, so they would hang out and, amongst other things, do some drinking, as some of the bottles we discovered suggested. Kind of laughed when we saw this. We knew there was a fiber optic cable there. One, I had no idea how deep it was. I mean, that thing is a good 9-10 feet underground. And two, it bored right through all the limestone, no problem. And you can see again more of these kerosene containers there. Here's a series of photographs that look around focus in on the area where that cable was. That bricked up area was clearly something that was done before the brewery closed, because that would lead to other cellars. And I'm convinced, and there's a slide at the end where I kind of outline where I thought all the cellars were based on just the lay of the land and what we had discovered. We did, Tom Presney was kind enough to dig down about 2.5 feet, and we found a portion of the cellar floor, so we knew it was concrete. And then we set about going ahead, taking measurements, getting the details of the cellar together to document how it was constructed. And surprisingly, both cellars were 15 feet wide by 30 feet long, and there were less than 2 inches difference between the two of them. So for guys not having all these computers and modern tools, this work was extremely impressive. Now, there are a few things we noticed. You can kind of see it. I think that's Tom Presney on his left arm. You can kind of see a little square, maybe just to the left of his hand there. That something was clearly in there horizontally. I'm not sure what it was, but there were wood remains in there. And there was also a door more on the left side where Brent was in his blue outfit. And that's where I think all this limestone came crashing through. So now we're in the second cellar, and I'll draw your attention to where kind of Colonel Mike is got his hands up there. That whole area there on the ceiling began deteriorating with the decades of water leaking through it. And where he's at now, I think it's a vent, but when you would come towards the where the picture was taken, the ceiling kept getting worse and worse. What we're doing there is digging down, again, confirming what the floor was made of. And this is perhaps the most interesting artifact. We'll never know truly what it was, but it was a wooden structure, and the wood was shaped to butt up against the cellar wall, and it was rounded. It had a round shape to it, curved, I should say, as opposed to round. And there were about an inch and a half holes drilled through it. Best guess would be with some type of shelf. What it stored, we don't know, but we do have a small piece of that with that round hole. Most of it, again, because the moisture had just been so deteriorated, it just you couldn't save it. And again, you get more of these kerosene containers scattered about. I think there's a few paint cans in there. Here's a close-up of and all these are clues. All these bricks that are annotated or embossed, they each offer a clue, because as we found out at the North Side Brewery, there's more than a dozen different bricks that they were used to build a brewery over the years. And there are people in this world, much like those who collect beer cans or beer bottles, there's guys who collect bricks, and they can enlighten you tremendously on who owned the brick factory, when that kind of style of brick was made. So these are all things that we can kind of pull together to tell the story. Now, you're looking here south, and you can see at the top just how close the ceiling was to collapsing. Not only is the wall heavily fractured, but the limestone there is just waiting to drop. And the fortunate thing I'll say about this whole incident here with the ceiling is the week before, city employees, they bring these massive lawnmowers, they're tractors, and they got to be at least a ton or close to it. And they 12 feet wide and have all these blades cutting the grass. They drive right over this area. And they didn't have any idea really how close it was. They came to just had we not taken a look at this when we did, to no kidding, just falling through there and falling down, a good 10 feet, not realizing what hit him. So I didn't get the name of the gentleman who was cutting the grass, but I at least hope to get a Christmas card from him for preventing that from happening. This is the same cellar that when it's deteriorating, the end walls were perfect. And here's some of the leftovers, the souvenirs we collected in there. You can see some of these liquor bottles that were in there. And for you younger kids who have heard of A&W but didn't know how they used to sell their root beer back in the day, they used these big glass jugs that look like this. I am just willing to bet that they were probably filled with things other than root beer. So the next thing I'm going to show you is a video of going in there and kind of take a closer look at everything. It's a 5-minute video. I wanted to just give you the layout. So you can see on the bottom left is the entrance. You'll be sliding down the dirt and then looking straight ahead to the limestone fill and the cellar that was behind there. And then as you wrap around over to the right, you go into cellar 2 with the collapsing ceiling. And then we never did get into cellar 3 because that one had already been filled. And then of course you have the fiber optic cable for a reference point there. So I'm going to kind of narrate what it is we're looking at as we go here. It wasn't the easiest entrance to get into and out of, especially for a guy that's north of 55 now. Every night before we left, we'd secure the area to make sure that no one could get in there, because that's always a fear. You'd have to turn around and slide on your butt. You can go down the hill a little bit there. So you're looking now as we come down through the dirt. And based on the smoking gun of the Big Mac container, we estimate that dirt that I'm sitting on right now was dumped there sometime in the 70s. And that's probably 3 or 4 truckloads of dirt, because that not only went forward, it also went over to the right into the archway and into the second cellar. So you can kind of get a more appreciation for just how big the cellar is here. Again, it was 30 feet long. And you can see how the sides, about 2.5, 3 feet up, they have some type of bump out. It's very slight. I'm not quite sure what that was used for, but you can see it's very pronounced there by my glove, and it runs the length of the cellar. There's the cool lights that I made for $25 to try to illuminate everything. The other thing, of course, I didn't bring with me when I went back the first time was the generator, so I had to run back home and get that. And that's where I'm pointing to, where there was a door entrance there. It's hard to see in this photo, but there was a nice straight edge there in the back of the cellar that clearly led to another cellar, a doorway. Most of the chunks of limestone you see there, we used those. We moved those ones from the ground over to eventually seal up the archway further north there. Because as you'll see when you see the video, as we move through the video, the second cellar was so close to collapsing, there was just really no way to save it. So again, now you're looking at the dirt that was dumped in there in all likelihood in the 1970s. And again, the air actually wasn't very bad to breathe in there, surprisingly. They did have vents for back in the day when the brewers would be working there, and that was one of the air vents, but they had filled it with concrete and limestone. And again, you can notice all the protrusions from the ceiling of the different types of metal pieces protruding that I know obviously serve some purpose for the brewery there. And then now I think I make my way up. I know I smashed my head, not so much in this video, but another time on one of those objects. And now I kind of squeezed through that opening into the second one. And again, this is where when we ended up sealing up the cellar, that whole archway was sealed a lot with that limestone and that really thick clay. So I think I'm going to squeeze through the hole here in a second. And there's another light in the other room. Now, I was very adamant that everyone stay away from the ceiling part that was getting ready to go. I was kind of like the safety patrol guy. Again, safety was always number one with us. And you see the beautiful end of that cellar there. I think I'm struggling with the extension cord a little bit there. The one thing, I muted all the sound for the video, but there was constant water dripping, so it almost felt like you were in a a leaky tunnel of sorts, and water just kept coming down. And I can only imagine after a rainstorm just how fragile that collapsing ceiling was. And again, it's very fortunate that no one fell in there. So there's some of the paint cans left over. Most of what we found when you picked it up, it was so rusted through, it would just really literally fall apart in your hands. You can see where we were doing some digging next to the wall there. I think we found some nails and a few other things, small bits and pieces. And to the right is where that shelf had stood, the wooden shelf that we got the one small piece of wood out with the hole in it. There's another vent that went up that had been sealed. And now you can kind of get more of appreciation as I spin back a little bit there of just how close that second cellar was close to collapsing. The fiber optic cable, again, I don't know how those guys do it, but they do a heck of a job there getting that cable through. And it's very expensive if you break that. So that was clearly a concern of mine, which is one of the reasons why we went manual with the dig and not equipment. You can see more of the kerosene containers laying around. There must have been about a dozen of them. Not to mention, I'm sure there are some that were probably buried in the dirt. And then you got the ceiling. And look, again, it looks like it's just getting ready to go at any second there. Yeah, you can see some water dropping through the picture, through the camera as it goes through. The impressive thing in that archway, the base of it was almost 3 feet, and then it narrowed considerably as it went to the top. But again, keeping in mind, this was part of the original cellar built under the original brewery in 1861. It was in remarkably good shape. All right, you see that hole in the wall back there? Water had just eaten away at all of that. You can see some of the dark gaps in between the limestone there. It was just a very scary place to be. And I'm just very fortunate that we were able to catch it before anything bad happened to anyone. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how the cellar was collapsed, because at the end of this, we ended up sealing the cellar number 1 and turned in a report of sorts to the city for them to go ahead and have them give the information they needed to go ahead and collapse the cellar without damaging the fiber optic cable. But before I get too far along that, I do want to share yet another beer trivia question with you. This is a good one. I think few people remember this because it's not quite as old. In 1907, Michael Buob Brewing Company purchased a lot along the Interurban Railway. Hint, that's near where the back of the yards is, to build a modern hotel with 25 rooms, a spacious dining room, lobby, and a bar. This hotel later became which of the following? The Frank and Ruby's, the back of the yards, Skelly's, Jumbo's, or Hammy's? It's pretty much a toss-up between Frank and Ruby's and Skelly's, but it turned out to be Skelly's, and we found that out through another article in the 1950s. Of course, the hotel changed hands a number of times from Michael Buob, later became Skelly's. Frank and Ruby's was there on the right, and I want to say those buildings were destroyed not too terribly long ago. I think there's a gas station on the corner, or Casey's or something like that. But again, that's another piece of history that I didn't know when I started this project, and I just wish I had the opportunity to get more things documented from them before they were destroyed. So these are the measurements, just for clarification, of what the cellar looked like. And again, it's very impressive just how precise they were. This is part of the presentation I gave back to the city with our estimated guess based on what we'd uncovered of how many cellars were there. If you've ever driven by the ice arena, you can see where all that brush is growing by E, how all that's been cut out. I'm convinced all that were previously cellars. The brewery was extremely successful, much like the North Side. They shipped their beer to Indiana, Illinois, Minnesota, more than likely Iowa as well. So they produced a lot. They had to store a lot, so they needed a large area to store their beer. Now, of course, when refrigeration came along, they didn't need as many cellars, but they didn't have much of an area really to expand there. It's not like they added a new ice house to store beer. So these cellars, I think, remained integral all the way through the brewery until they closed in 1918 timeframe. You do notice that there are some dash blue lines that go underneath Beloit Avenue. There was an article in the Gazette about at least one of them that went to the bottling house, because in the mid 1890s, once it became legal for brewers to bottle their beer on site, a tunnel went from one of the cellars to the bottling house. And if you look at the bottling house today, you can see how the second store, the ground floor is really half buried. That's all been, of course, unfortunately filled in, but there were tunnels underneath there. The dashed line to the furthest north, just under the electrical line, there may have been something there that led to one of those houses, because one of the brewers actually lived there. And this is kind of what we left before I departed in the middle of June. This is how we laid everything out. We made sure we cordoned off the one cellar that was still decent, in good shape, and kind of identified where the collapsing point was on the second cellar. And I really have to take my hat off to the city. We ended up meeting with one of the city officials, Paul Woodard was his name, and he was kind enough to take a meeting with us and explain to him the significance of what it is we found, and requested, hey, the one cellar is a bit far gone, but is there any way we can at least keep the second one intact? We can seal it, or the first one intact. We can seal it up. Don't know what we're going to do with it, if we'll ever be able to do anything with it, but is there just a way we can preserve it so it's just not lost completely? And he was very supportive of that, and we were extremely appreciative of that. So kind of wanted to make sure we had a clear line between the one that should collapse, be collapsed, and the other one that should stay intact. And I have some video now of the actual cellar collapse. Brent was kind enough to take 2 days of leave from the sheriff's department to actually film the collapse, which in many ways is quite sad, especially when you've been researching something for 5 years and you know all the characters, all the people who were part of it, and then you find something from the past that goes back to the 1860s. There's kind of a connection there of sorts on the historical context. And, you know, unfortunately, you can't save everything. So the city, when they came out to started doing the excavation, they started digging down about 2.5, 3 feet, and the first thing they noticed was this large concrete slab that, in all probability, was the original was a floor to the brewery at the ground level. Because both of these cellars that we went in, based on the layout, I actually spray painted the entire footprint of the brewery in red spray paint. Both of those cellars were well within the confines of that footprint. So they found the concrete slab, and now what they did is they moved a bit further north to try to find an entrance into it, because they really couldn't just go breaking and smashing into it, because you didn't want to run the risk of damaging that fiber optic cable, which would have cost tens of thousands of dollars to go ahead and repair. So they're finally able to get a slight opening, and this poor gentleman here is digging away at the opening point there, and he's trying to widen it. You can't really see much of the limestone for the cellar in this angle. They widened it. Now you can see more of the limestone on the top, just underneath the concrete cellar. And what they're doing here is they're making a ramp, because, again, you can't just go in there and start smashing it without damaging the fiber optic cable. So the plan was to use this fast drying concrete to flood the floor above the fiber optic cable to protect it. So when you do smash it down, you don't damage that cable whatsoever. So here they are. They're just maneuvering. They've widened the hole into the really the north end of the cellar, and they're building that ramp with dirt. And then they, using a couple different pieces of machinery there, they have a tube where they actually pump the concrete in to go ahead and fill the base. It's actually, I wish I were able to see it. It's pretty impressive. But again, all this from a historical perspective is great. I mean, it's very thankful for Brent taking the time off to document all this. And I don't know the name of the gentleman who was working the excavator, but I do have something for him to, if anyone knows who he was, please let me know, because I do owe him a small token of appreciation for the outstanding work he did. So now what they've done here is they've got the concrete in there. It's hardened. This is the next day. They start moving some dirt around. because what they're going to do next then is actually start collapsing the cellar, which it takes a little bit of time because you have to be methodical in the process, because you don't want to have something collapse that you don't expect to collapse. So again, they start, this is actually on the side of the cellar, so they're more on the east side of the cellar, and you can see large concrete slabs from the floor that they had smashed in, and now they're really smashing things together and then moving things around to kind of minimize the number of air pockets and things. They want things packed in as tightly as possible. You do see a big piece of limestone there. It's tough to say, maybe that had been from a previous fill, just not sure, or it was part of the building that was torn down. We were able to get a handful of bricks from here for souvenirs, and one of them I think actually gave to one of the Buob family members, which they were very appreciative for. So now you're looking at the cellar lengthwise. They're just peeling back, kind of like taking the lid off of a can. That piece of concrete there is obviously from the floor. And fortunately, the piece of equipment is far enough back that it's not going to go through. But when Brent was recording this, he said as soon as they just touched, the bucket touched the collapsing part of the cellar, everything just immediately came crumbling down. And then they begin peeling back the sides to expose the area more. So right now he's very close to where the fiber optic cable was, which is now of course covered by concrete that they had poured in. So again, they're making the entrance wider because you have a lot of area to fill there. I'm not sure what the cubic feet would be of the area, but it's considerably large. There's a zoom in there where you can see the limestone forming the ceiling of the cellar. And then they, I believe the last thing that they're going to do then, let's see, you see, he just barely touched it and the whole thing falls. Very sad, but really there was nothing you could do to preserve that. And the last thing that they do then is they bring in the actual fill, several dump truck loads. Again, this is another day, multi-day operation clearly. They bring in the dirt and they bring another machine in, a skid loader, start moving the dirt to actually fill it in, which didn't take long at all. You can see the tractor in the background there. And this is what it looked like when all was said and done. And if you go by there today, you couldn't tell that there was any type of cellar there before. There may be a few small sinkholes from settling, but nothing much at all. And I sealed up the entrance to the one cellar, and that thing is sealed extremely tight. It'd be very difficult for someone to get in there, and no, that's not a challenge. So after all this happened, we kind of went into what I call stealth mode, because we were fortunate enough, we contacted the Janesville Gazette and told them that, hey, we found something pretty cool and we've got some backstory on it. But we didn't want to spread the word on any of this. I mean, only a handful of people went into the cellars intentionally, because we didn't want it getting out on social media that, hey, there's some beer cellars and people coming in after dark. So we just kept things quiet until the cellars were actually completely filled in. And then the following day, Frank Schultz, one of the writers at the Janesville Gazette, he wrote an article, a story on the brewery that was far, far more than I ever expected, and was extremely thankful for. He and a photographer were able to come in, take some pictures, using some of the information we provided. He told an outstanding story. I think the one downside that I have on this is, I tend to be the guy out in front of all this, gets the pictures taken and the recognition. But this whole thing, and I mean this sincerely, it was due to Colonel Mike and Tom Presney and their determination to say, hey, look, we've got something, we believe in it, come along for this. And they made this whole thing possible. And again, Frank wrote just an incredible article, was able to work in the photograph from Bob Witzak to the painting he made. Because I always told Bob, I said, hey, Bob, one day this painting is going to be famous. You just wait. And it took a couple of years, but it did. Finally made it. big. So the last piece is what's next. The future is unwritten, as the saying goes. But before I get into that, I'll leave you with the last trivia question for the day, which is another building question. In 1907, Michael Buob purchased this building, which still stands on Milwaukee Street today. Was it the original YMCA, which is at the far end of West Milwaukee Street, O'Reilly Conway Pub, First National Bank, Monterey Hotel, or the Hotel London? And the answer to this one is the Hotel London. He purchased it around 1910, owned it for several years. As he stepped back from the brewing business and his son took it over, he became more involved in property. And Michael lived in Janesville until around 1927 when he passed away over on Caroline Street. So I had a great opportunity to meet with the owners of this building about a year and a half ago. They allowed me to go in and photograph the entire building. And if you go to the Janesville Brewery's Facebook page, you can go back. It'd be a little over a year ago. There's it's a two-part series of posts that talk about the history of this fascinating building, and it shows a lot of the current photographs of current pictures of what it looks like today. So what's next? Well, again, I said the first cellar remains intact. There's nothing. It's just there. There's no plans to go back in there. I keep playing the lottery. Maybe one day I'll get lucky. Just the fact that the city was kind enough to preserve it, it gives it a chance, which is really all you can ask for. The Janesville Brewery Research Project continues to move forward. The main effort we've been working on is kind of clearing out the remnants, the debris that was at the North Side Brewery. And now if you walk back there, I'd encourage you to please take a walk behind there. It's on the Kiwanis Trail, which is part of the Ice Age Trail. A number of foundations have been exposed. There is a little bit of signage up there overlooking the fence, overlooking the fermentation cellar. But we've exposed 2 engine rooms. The picture you see in the bottom is actually of the bottling house. And there are several other areas that we're in the process of clearing out. The intent there is to kind of recognize the significance of the area, get some signage up, get some more fences up as we uncover more things to make it safe. And have it, we'd even like to integrate an online type of tour where you can see some more of the pictures and learn more of the brewers, which again were John and Michael Buob, Knipp, Louis F. Knipp, and the Croak family. And they operated that until 1939. A ton of history in that area. So I keep saying to myself every year, I'm going to build a website to start populating with all this information we've uncovered. I've just committed to beginning it by 2021. And every year I'll continue making the trips back to Janesville to work. Again, some of the fascinating people I've met that have helped out. Young gentleman named Michael Palmer. He's always at the North Side helping out to dig out stuff. He had a friend, Ashton. He's been helping us out as well. It's kind of got a little family growing here. People who just volunteer whenever I come back into town to help clear this out. I would just recommend that if you want to continue to follow along, just check the Janesville Brewery's Facebook page, because once a month we put something up there. This last shot is really of the final building that's associated with Janesville's beer brewing history. Richard Arndt is the gentleman who owns it, a very nice gentleman. He has a funny story. When they were putting in the addition to the left, they had dug down about 6-8 feet. And as the excavator was pulling out the dirt, somebody yelled, "Stop, stop, stop." And they noticed a ton of beer bottles. So they jumped in the pit, dug them out, got them. And then they went ahead and continued building the addition there. I'm sure some of those bottles are still floating around Janesville today. But again, this whole area that you're looking at, you can kind of see just below the lower portion of under the sign there, you see the horizontal brick. There's a solid line there. Then underneath there, you see 2 windows. That's the ground level you see today was probably about 5 or 8 feet lower than what you're seeing today. So the whole area has changed completely. As much as we've tried, there's just simply not a lot of bottles or artifacts in that area whatsoever. Springbrook has changed so much. It's just not a whole lot there to find. So in closing, I really want to give a sincere thanks to Paul Woodard and Cullen Slapeck and Ethan Lee. Those gentlemen have been instrumental in not only what we've done at the South Side, but also in allowing us to continue work on the North Side, which The significance of the Northside Brewery, I think, cannot be overstated, because it is one of the few breweries in the state of Wisconsin and perhaps in the Midwest where you have the entire footprint of a brewery that began in 1856 all the way to 1939, and that footprint is still there today. And it's just the whole area there behind Mercy Hospital, the Croft and Coleman editions are what they call them, is just riddled with history. You had elevator company there, you had coal companies, you had lumber companies. That whole area was extremely vibrant, and the fact that they're allowing us to continue to do that work is, again, extremely appreciated. Again, Colonel Mike Williams and Tom Presney, I can't thank these gentlemen enough. Mike's conviction that something was there was spot on. Had it been left up to me, I'd probably still be digging by those 3 pine trees looking for something that I wouldn't find. Frank Schultz for his terrific Gazette article, and Phil Schomber for putting together today's presentation with the Hedberg Library. And I can't say enough good things about the resources we have that the Historical Society makes available, as well as the Hedberg Library. Again, they have the Janesville room. I'd highly recommend, if you're into local history, please check it out. The Historical Society has some great resources online. And really, the final thank you would be for the people who take the time out of their day to go ahead and share their stories. A lot of people think that I just have a little bit of information, it doesn't really mean that much. But those little bits and pieces, like the gentleman, Phil Suter, who was in the tunnel in the beer cellars in 2012, all that information comes together and it helps to paint a picture, because you never know where it's going to lead. So with that, here's the contact information. I'm always looking for more information or stories. I don't care if they're second or third hand about Janesville's breweries. Doesn't have to be the North Side or South Side. There's 18 more or 16 more of them that are out there. And I think I'm doing pretty good on the time. Let me see if I can now transition back. Phil, can you jump in here for me?
Yeah, so Rob, thanks for just a magnificent presentation. I think we all appreciate all the detail and the maps and the videos. It brings it to life. We do have a little bit of time, so if you have some questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. We'll monitor those. But Rob, I do have a question. If you mentioned that they can follow you on Janesville Brewery Facebook page, but if somebody were they shared your interest in Janesville's brewing history, and they wanted to help you in some way, are there opportunities for them to do that?
Yeah, yes, there are. And there's really 2 tracks to that. If they wanted to help out research-wise, always looking for people. It's kind of a grind to do the research work, because you'll spend hours. But I'm always open to people helping with that. Or whenever we come back into town and we organize cleaning crews, a lot of work is done, like at the north side with the volunteers from the Ice Age Trail. They've done the yeoman's work, clearing a lot of that brush out of there. So what I can do is get a hold of me, and what I'll do is I'll keep a hold of your name, and as I get closer to determining exactly when I'll come back, I can reach out, and we can just leverage anyone who wants to volunteer.
So if they want to get in, jump into some of the excavating equipment, any opportunities for that? Or is it...
We're always looking for equipment to help make the process easier at the north side, because a lot of those foundations are under 2.5, 3 feet of debris. But we like to take things slowly, just for, again, safety is always paramount in everything we do.
Yeah, you probably want to keep the likes of me away from any of the heavy machinery. I might not only hurt myself, but others as well. But
I'm in the same boat, because if I was running a skid loader, I guarantee it'd end up in the Rock River.
All right. Well, Rob, I think we've covered everything. Again, I want to thank you for not just all the research that you've done, but the way that you package it and just put it together. And again, bring Janesville's brewing history to life. And again, I think we all appreciate that. So I want to thank everybody for joining us tonight. Thank Rob for coming, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.